Hello again and welcome. I'm James Bays. Pakistan has rejected fresh accusations that it's directly supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. The claims came from a secret US report which has been leaked to media organisations. The highly classified report was put together by the US military at the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan for top NATO commanders last month. It includes information that's been gained in interrogations with thousands of members of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and other foreign fighters. So let's run through the key points from the leaked documents. First one, Pakistan's intelligence is assisting the Taliban in attacks against foreign forces. The ISI knows the whereabouts and harbours senior Taliban figures. Backed by Pakistan, the Taliban are set to retake control over Afghanistan after NATO-led forces withdraw from the country. Taliban leaders meet regularly with ISI personnel on strategy issues. Afghan civilians frequently prefer Taliban governance due to government corruption. And listen to this one quote in the report. It comes from a senior Al-Qaeda detainee. He says, "Pakistan knows everything. They control everything. The Taliban are not Islam. The Taliban are Islamabad." So is a new Taliban government Pakistan's favoured option for Afghanistan? And who would benefit from the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan once again? To answer these questions, we're joined by our guests today. In Islamabad, Syed Hamid, a political analyst and head of the Pakistani security think tank Brass Tacks. In Kabul, Wali Massoud, president of the Massoud Foundation and a former Afghan ambassador to the UK. And in Washington, Richard Weitz, he's senior fellow and director of the Centre for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to start in Kabul. Wali Massoud, you've seen the details that have come out in these leaks from this document that has come out from the US military. I'd like your response first, because Afghanistan has suffered a lot from the Taliban, but you personally and your family have suffered a lot from the Taliban. Your brother, the legendary commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, killed just before 9/11 back in 2001. What's your reaction that the Taliban are still being supported by Pakistan?
Let me just start that we have been saying that one all along. For the past decades, we have said that Pakistan is supporting the Taliban, especially the intelligence service of Pakistan, ISI. So therefore, for me and for us, that's not a surprise. Probably for some others, that might be a surprise. For us, that's very natural. That has been the fact before, that is now today, and it will continue to be the case, unfortunately. And let me say that when I met the foreign minister of Pakistan today, it was something what I sensed, that they wanted to have a sort of exit strategy, a new strategy. I hope that the civilian foreign minister of Pakistan is right in her determination to really have sort of exit strategy, to come out from what happened in the past. Well, the leak itself suggests that the ISI is still continuing to support the Taliban, and they have got the leaders there, they have got the bases there, they have got the equipment there, so therefore resources there.
Zaid, can we get the perspective from Pakistan? You're not going to deny that parts of your security apparatus support the Taliban, are you?
You see, one thing that I'm not going to deny is that Pakistan has been supporting the NATO and the Americans and the Afghan transit trade. And hundreds of thousands of containers of equipment, weapons and supplies pass through Pakistan to support the occupation forces.
Yes,
I don't deny that.
But they've been hedging their bets, haven't they? Yes, they've been doing that. And then Directorate S of the ISI has been there supporting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, hasn't it?
You see, this is where the funny part is, because when we supported the Afghan Mujahideen in the 80s, we supported them with logistical supplies, base areas, training camps, and a massive military support coming from Pakistan to defeat the Soviet Union. Now, if the same superpower, similar superpower, the Americans and the NATO, are being defeated in Afghanistan, but the ISI and the Pakistan army are fighting a war of their own within the Pakistani borders, the basic question that the Pakistani army asks is, who is supporting the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan? Pakistan army already has its hands full in fighting insurgencies in Balochistan and TTP, with almost 100,000 Pakistanis killed and wounded. Now, for God's sake, I mean, these allegations, I am an old fighter, veteran of the Afghan resistance. Ahmad Shah Massoud is a dear brother and friend of mine. With all due respect to his brother, whom I hold very close to me, even if he doesn't know me, because he was an ambassador of Ahmad Shah Massoud outside Afghanistan during that time. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan supported the Afghan resistance of the 80s, and that was a blatant, open support. But now even the Americans, the most heavily monitored areas are the Pakistan-Afghanistan region. Americans have not come up with any proof to prove that a container, that a supply vehicle, that an ammunition truck has gone from Pakistan to support the Afghan Taliban. It must be corroborated. It must be supported. We have not seen
Richard,
any
in
proof
Washington, do you believe there is? Do you believe there's proof? Does Washington have proof?
Well, we have to be careful about the recent leak. What that's come out today is that NATO has interrogated thousands of captured Taliban or suspected Taliban, and they told NATO interrogators that, we think we're going to win. We have the support of the Pakistanis. The Pakistani government's giving us all the assistance. And they might say that because they believe it, or they might say that because they want NATO to think that in order to cause tensions between NATO and Afghanistan, the government of Pakistan. Now, aside from that report, there is, of course, a whole bunch of other allegations and evidence that some groups within Pakistan are supporting the Afghan Taliban.
Well, you say allegations and evidence. Is it allegations or is it evidence? Do you think there's clear evidence in the hands of the US military?
Yes, I think that there is evidence that some groups within Pakistan, including some people within the Pakistani government, are supporting the Afghan Taliban, at least to the extent of wanting to retain ties with the organization in case it does come back to power, in order to make sure that they have a harmonious relationship in that case.
Ziad, do you agree with that or not?
You see, the point is, one thing is keeping relationships and talks to them and engaging them, like the Americans are engaging the Afghan Taliban. But we are talking about supporting a resistance, war of resistance, which is bogging down the Americans and the NATO. Where is this material support? Where is the support to the weapons? Where is the support of the equipment and ammunition, which the Americans are talking Pakistan is supporting Taliban? I mean, borders are open. For the last 8 years, Pakistan has been saying to the Americans and the Afghan government, let's fence the border. Let's seal the border with minefields and fencing and put border posts so that the borders are sealed. But it's the Afghan government who's been resisting the idea and constantly putting allegations on Pakistan. And again, the Pakistani argument is that who is supporting the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is bogging down 500,000 Pakistan army in a counterinsurgency war. For God's sake, I mean, one has to back things up with proof, with corroborated evidence. And the war in Afghanistan is going on, the most fiercest of war is going on in Helmand, in Kandahar, in the regions which are away from North Waziristan. The Americans say Al-Qaeda and Haqqani network is based in North Waziristan. North Waziristan is hundreds of kilometers away from Helmand, where the fighting is going on. And the fact is that it's the NATO. NATO pays $400 million per year to Afghan Taliban to let the Afghan NATO supplies pass through. You hear of attacks on NATO supplies in Pakistan, but not in Afghanistan. The point is, Afghan army has acknowledged that they have lost 250,000 weapons which were given to the Afghan National Army, and now they're lost, unaccounted for, and they have gone to Taliban. And it's the hundreds of Taliban were escaped from a Kandahar jail, joining the resistance. Pakistan army and ISI is not doing it. Again we say, come up with evidence. Let's talk the walk, as they say, or walk the talk, whatever the English idiom is.
OK, well, one of the things that I found interesting about this leak was the timing of it, because it came just before Pakistan's foreign minister visited Kabul. Hino Rabbani Khan dismissed the leaked report.
Claims are new. These claims have been made for many, many years, and we all know the reasons for that, because we had a common agenda with most of the other players in the world many, many years back, and that doesn't seem to be leaving us in terms of its effect. But more importantly, I think it would be important to look at the conversations which are being taken place with the Taliban by many other important capitals of the world. So I think I can just disregard this as potentially a strategic leak or otherwise.
OK, well, Wali Massoud in Kabul, you met the foreign minister today. You were part of the opposition delegation that met her. Were you convinced by her words? And do you believe that she represents the part of the Pakistan government that might be backing the Taliban? Or are you actually dealing with different things with the Pakistan military and the Pakistan civilian government?
Well, let me make it very clear that I have seen a very distinct difference between the civilian government and the ISI and the army in Pakistan. That's becoming more and more evident. And therefore, what I heard from the foreign minister of Pakistan, who is part of the civilian government, is totally different from what we see on the ground in Afghanistan and back in Pakistan. So therefore, let me say it very clearly that my Pakistani friend before he argued about something. Well, probably for publicity his argument is okay, but the fact is different. Put it this way, for years Pakistan denied that Osama bin Laden was not inside Pakistan, but at the end of the day he was caught near Islamabad. General Musharraf himself, Mr. Hamid Gul, General Hamid Gul himself, they all admitted that they are promoting, they are supporting Taliban. So therefore there is no room for denial that Pakistan are not backing the Taliban, as there was no room for denial, as my Pakistani friend said, that the Pakistani supported the resistance or the Mujahideen in Pakistan. So therefore, the same way they have supported the Taliban in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. So therefore, what I got from the foreign minister of Pakistan today, that for me, it seemed that they are doing sort of exit strategy. Probably she may want to say that, look, we are not anymore supporting the proxies that have been established in the past, and that's not our game or that's not our play. That belonged to the past. So therefore, I'm here to tell the Afghan people, to the government of Afghanistan, as well as to the opposition in the south as well as in the north, that Pakistan wants to have a state-to-state relation, have a good relation. It's a welcoming remark and welcoming news from her, provided that there is sort of consensus in Pakistan between the civilian and the military there.
Richard, can I ask you about the timing of all this and the context of it all? You've told us about your views about how this information, this leaked report came about and how it was prisoners who'd been interrogated. But the fact this is coming up now, when US-Pakistan relations are at such a low point, do you think there'll be questions now on Capitol Hill about whether America should still be giving Pakistan $4 billion in military aid every year?
I wouldn't make too much into the timing. I mean, we've been this for the past year. It's been one blow every month or so. So, you know, we found Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. There was the American killing of the Pakistani border forces. There was the retirement speech of the former Chief of Staff of the United States, Admiral Mullins, saying that accusing the Pakistanis of orchestrating attack on the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, and so on. So this is just one more blow to the relationship. So I'm not sure. People have already pretty much made up their minds whether they will support Pakistan or oppose it. I mean, the general feeling is that, as our colleague in Pakistan has pointed out, for the most part, most Pakistani people in the government are supporting NATO. Pakistan has incurred incredible losses fighting the extremists in their own country. The United States and Pakistan share a series of important strategic interests, but they're recurring sources of tension because the ethnic group that is primarily involved in the insurgency in the Afghan Taliban, the Pashtuns, happens also to reside pretty heavily along the border route inside Pakistan. The United States supported Pakistan's efforts to work with the Taliban, or at least Islamic groups, a decade ago, and then the United States reversed position, so it's a bit of awkward for the Pakistanis who have to follow suit. And of course we know the Americans are incredibly unpopular in Pakistan, so it's a very difficult relationship. For the most part, we find net benefits working with Pakistan. And it's hard to see how you could end up with a peace agreement that would be enduring without Pakistan support as NATO troops pull out. Because what's most likely will happen if Pakistan is not wholeheartedly comfortable with the relationship is we'll see renewed civil war.
Ziad, in Islamabad, we know from this report that those that were interrogated, these Taliban prisoners, believe in the end the Taliban will be back in government. What's your view of the end game once NATO forces pull out of Afghanistan after 2014, or some predict possibly earlier?
You see, the point is, the Taliban, just like the Afghan resistance of the 80s, we were sure at that time that sooner or later we would beat the Soviets, we would push them out of Afghanistan. And that euphoria exists in the Afghan resistance even today. And now when the Americans are coming down to talk to them, now when the Americans are talking of an exit strategy, the fact is simple. The Afghan confidence is at an all-time high. And they feel that now they are in a negotiating position that they can dictate their terms to the Americans and the NATO. And they are definitely right in that, because if we haven't noticed, Americans are not seem to be gaining ground in Afghanistan. But I would like to refer to your earlier question of the timings of this report. The fact is that the relationship between Pakistan Army and the ISI and the CIA are an all-time low now. Especially after the massacre of the Pakistani soldiers, the NATO supply line has been blocked for the last 2 months now, and that's unprecedented. But more importantly, what happened is that when the supply line was blocked and Pakistan Army saw the hardware that was going into Afghanistan, it made the Pakistan Army very alarmed. Because if the Americans on one hand are talking of leaving Afghanistan, on the other hand, the hardware, about 3,500 military vehicles and 5,000 containers full of weapons and explosives and ammunitions, which means that it's an invasion level build-up. Almost 7 to 9 armored infantry divisions are going in. With the reports that the Americans are also bringing in Abrams M1A1 main battle tanks from Iraq into Afghanistan.
Okay,
Now,
let's get the perspective of Wali Massoud. He lives in Afghanistan. He's in touch with people on the ground. Tell us your view of the battlefield right now. Who is actually winning, and what do you predict happening in 2014 when NATO pulls out, which is now less than 2 years away?
Let me first say that in the 80s, when there was Afghan Mujahideen resistance, that was not the Pakistani who pushed the Russian out of Afghanistan. That was the resistance of the Afghan people. And let me remind the general that it was Commander Massoud who eventually came to evict Dr. Najibullah from Kabul. That was not the plan of Pakistan, which really they invested millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on their own leader, like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and others. That did not materialize. So therefore, the credit of eviction of Russian could not go to Pakistan. Yes, we are indebted, we are thankful for Pakistani people that the refugees of Afghans were there and they have behaved so well with the Afghan refugee. But that's all.
So you say, Mr. Massoud, you say it was the Afghan people. Okay, and I accept that point. Where do the Afghan people stand now? Are they on the side of Hamid Karzai's government, or are increasingly some of them thinking that in the end the Taliban's going to win, so why don't we support them? We certainly see the number of attacks by Afghan security personnel on the rise.
Let me say that the Afghan people have already had the experience of Taliban reign in Afghanistan. Let me say that more than half of the population of Afghanistan, they are women. None of the women, they want the Taliban to come back. And men in Afghanistan, most of the people in Afghanistan, they don't want the Taliban to come back because they have already experienced the Taliban reign in the government. But at the same time, it does not mean that they are backing Hamid Karzai government, because Hamid Karzai government is as corrupt as the very medieval policies of the Taliban. So therefore, people of Afghanistan are here. We do not really want to be the victim of this sort of games between different countries. If Pakistan have got problem there, as my friend the general said, it has to solve its problem with the American. But Afghanistan should not be the field for this sort of interest game and sort of rivalry. We have to really kind of assess the Afghan people altogether to see how exactly they can bring peace amongst themselves, not to leave it to others to bring peace for us.
Richard in Washington, the US administration must believe that the Taliban has some sort of role after 2014. Otherwise, it wouldn't be pursuing this strategy of reaching out and talking to them, would it?
Well, the calculation is it is impossible to kill, capture, or secure the defection of all the thousands of people who are affiliated with the Taliban insurgency. So by default, therefore, you have to negotiate or reincorporate, do something with those remainder. There is a hope that you could come to some kind of peace agreement that would allow the Taliban to feel comfortable about being reintegrated in Afghan society, but cease to engage in military activity or to support international terrorist groups. But as the previous speaker pointed out, there's complications over the Taliban's view about the role of women and the Afghan constitution and so on. Here in the U.S., if you put that aside, there's a general feeling that the Afghan Taliban, unlike al-Qaeda, wouldn't support international terrorist movements. But there's a concern that they also wouldn't crack down if, for example, al-Qaeda tried to establish a base there. So there need to be some more secure guarantee. So that's where we are. I mean, the thinking is you have to engage in some kind of peace agreement. But the interrogations, insofar as you believe them, point to a serious flaw, which is the Taliban is thinking, well, let's just wait a couple years, the Americans leave, and then we'll resume our offensive against a weaker Afghan government. And this strategy proved very effective in the case of Vietnam.
Okay,
so
well, given that might be their strategy, Wally Massoud, how concerned are you about the future of your country? And is your concern added to by the fact that some countries, like France, for example, which seems to be the first, might not now be sticking to the timeline that's been agreed by NATO? They might be pulling out before 2014, we hear.
Well, of course we are concerned about this because for the past 10 years, the investment which happened in Afghanistan took place in Afghanistan. All the backing and support which went to President Karzai's government. Unfortunately, Mr. Karzai could not materialize, could not take the benefit of all the support for Afghanistan. So therefore, Afghanistan right now at this moment is not in a position to take some responsibility, although there is some sort of talk of transition of security responsibility to the Afghans. But from my point of view, I don't think Afghanistan is ready to take, especially the government of Afghanistan is not ready to take that sort of responsibility. 2014 is a very critical time and day. What we are saying is that we really have to focus what sort of consensus or a national unity government in Afghanistan can we bring in order to take responsibility from the NATO, from the international community for the Afghan themselves. We cannot really give responsibility.
Will you be happy, because you are an enemy of the Taliban and have been, would you be happy to sit in a national unity government with members of the Taliban, possibly Mullah Omar in the same government as yourself?
Well, let me say that, provided that there is some sort of acceptance and announcement that, yes, we do want peace, and they denounce the violence, they denounce terrorists. Of course, at the end of the day, everyone wants peace in Afghanistan. So therefore, there's not something sort of enmity or revenge or something like that. We want to have peace in Afghanistan, but not a tactical peace, but not a political peace. We want a permanent and durable and long-lasting peace in Afghanistan. It can only be achieved when the government of Afghanistan is a position of strength, not in a position of very weakness and fragile government as we have got today.
Well, all of us who like going to Afghanistan, and I've spent a lot of time there, really would like a situation where there was no more bloodshed, but it seems a long way off. Thanks to all our guests. In Islamabad, Zaid Hamid; in Kabul, Wally Massoud; and in Washington, Richard Weitz. And as ever, we want your input here on Inside Story. Your ideas for future editions are welcome. What should we cover? In which way should we cover it? The email is insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye now. Head of the Pakistani security think tank Brass Tacks. In Kabul, Wali Massoud, president of the Massoud Foundation and a former Afghan ambassador to the UK. And in Washington, Richard Weitz, he's senior fellow and director of the Centre for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to start in Kabul. Wali Massoud, you've seen the details that have come out in these leaks from this document that has come out from the US military. I'd like your response first, because Afghanistan has suffered. Hello again and welcome. I'm James Bays. Pakistan has rejected fresh accusations that it's directly supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. The claims came from a secret US report which has been leaked to media organisations. The highly classified report was put together by the US military at the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan for top NATO commanders last month. It includes information that's been gained in interrogations with thousands of members of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and other foreign governments due to government corruption. And listen to this one quote in the report. It comes from a senior Al-Qaeda detainee. He says, "Pakistan knows everything. They control everything. The Taliban are not Islam. The Taliban are Islamabad." So is a new Taliban government Pakistan's favoured option for Afghanistan? And who would benefit from the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan once again? To answer these questions, we're joined by our guests today. In Islamabad, Syed Hamid, a political analyst, suffered a lot from the Taliban. But you personally and your family have suffered a lot from the Taliban. Your brother, the legendary commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, killed just before 9/11 back in 2001. What's your reaction that the Taliban are still being supported by Pakistan?
Let me just start that we have been saying that one all along. For the past decades, we have said that Pakistan is supporting the Taliban.
Fighters. So let's run through the key points from the leaked documents. First one, Pakistan's intelligence is assisting the Taliban in attacks against foreign forces. The ISI knows the whereabouts and harbours senior Taliban figures. Backed by Pakistan, the Taliban are set to retake control over Afghanistan after NATO-led forces withdraw from the country. Taliban leaders meet regularly with ISI personnel on strategy issues. Afghan civilians frequently prefer Taliban government